Yes, now it is. And you're talking on mute, but that's okay.
Do not want to why it muted me. Now we're recording. Thank you. And thank you for letting me know I was talking on mute. I do that about 3 times a day. First of all, for people who weren't here on the first one, this is an IETF session. It's covered under Note Well. The agenda, what we had today was to have Jana's going to produce some stuff. I'm not sure if he's here yet. He said he was going to be a few minutes late. But when he arrives, we'll probably do that. Yari, completely out of the blue, without telling you, I would love it if you could present your slide 3 on user behavior, because it sort of fits right in here. I'll talk for a minute. But mostly I want to run today of just having discussion around initially what sort of things happened between the people trying to run applications on the internet and people trying to run the internet. Whatever we can talk about with that. I think there's a ton of people on this call that do have information about that type of environment. And then move into sort of broader things. The issues came up, what things came together. I'd prefer to have this much more of a discussion today. It was great to see all the papers and presentations on Monday. It was super information, but we didn't get enough time. We didn't get the time to talk about them. So I'm hoping some of that can come up and happen today. Thoughts on this agenda? Other things we should insert, remove, deal with?
So I was just wondering if towards the end, I think we should either tee up some topics for Friday or decide we don't need Friday, which is either could be possible. And there is one topic I think that would be good to cover somewhere, which is the part of this that was a success story. If this pandemic had happened 10 years ago, we would have been totally screwed. Whereas the internet now can do a lot more than then. So I think it might be useful to spend a few minutes reflecting on that and what we might want to write about that in a report or something.
That makes tons of sense. Agreed. So maybe 10 minutes around that at the end.
Sure. That could be a topic for Friday, or
sure. We'll put it. I'll just put it somewhere out there. It's amazing. Internet did not die. This is great.
And this actually goes back to the point that Brian raised on Monday. So was it all luck that we survived it, or was it not entirely pure luck? And I think the answer is like half-half.
Right.
So it's 50% luck, 50% very good engineering.
Look, I having seen. Let's talk about that in the main discussion part of this a bunch today. I think there was a lot of things that were not luck at all and went amazingly well. So
I actually think it worked as intended.
We have a vote at the end.
The IB workshop will take a vote on whether the internet's a good thing or not at the end. I mean, it's not a biased sample set at all.
But there was no luck. There's been many, many years of engineering to make it resilient, and it was just a little pow.
Well, there is a question whether, if this happened in a few years' time with current trends, whether it would hold up as well in the future.
If I inject something more theoretical, I think it's in the control theory, there is a well-defined topic called HOT, highly optimized tolerance. That says that for a given system, that can be engineered with higher tolerance, highly optimized but highly tolerant for given failure phenomena of the well-known issues that will fail miserably for unexpected conditions. If I can find that paper, I can send you the quote. That'd be my comment. I think that, with ever increasing demand on the network, the system overall has been well oiled to adjust to the surge of the traffic volume. So we, in that regard, we have been doing really well.
Well, look, let's jump into that when we get to the discussion part. That sounds interesting to hear about. Some people typing not on mute, so do mute if you're not speaking. I do not see Jana here yet. It's hard for me to see all of this at the same time. So, Jana, I think you're not here. So, Yari, would you be willing to talk about your slides here for a second? I'll put it up, the user behavior one, of just what you guys saw and how things were shifting on the applications.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty short, but okay.
Sure.
Can you display it from your end, or?
Yeah, I will.
Skip to slide 3 then directly. So, I mean, for the background, these were slides that I had made just to sort of highlight the obvious point that there's more to measurements than just the sort of congestion or not question or traffic amount. It's also about the qualitative changes and what people are actually doing and what's happening with the users and applications and so forth. And this was research not done by me, so I'm only reporting on other people's research, should be noted. It was research done by Ericsson. They had interviewed, or our other group of researchers had interviewed 11,000 people in various countries throughout the world and asked about many different kinds of things. And one of the things that they asked about was, how did you, what kind of applications were you using? So I have some measurements on some of those things, but I believe this one was based on the questionnaires. And so on the x-axis is the amount of user change or number of users being changed in a particular category of things. And on the y-axis is the actual usage change. So, and you would see some obvious things, not unexpected, like ride-hailing and travel applications were not particularly useful this year. And then remote working, e-learning, health applications, COVID-19 apps, and so on were quite popular. So I'm not really sure there's much more to say about this. This is sort of one view of things, like what did people actually do? And of course, there's some conclusions one could draw. Maybe, Colin, if you briefly show the next slide.
Yeah, sure.
2 more things. So you can sort of theorize like what actually was behind the thing, like, if we succeeded in something, why was it luck or some other things? But one of the things that I can sort of see myself, at least, that this cloud CDN type deployment methods were a big factor in being able to move different applications around. And networks is one thing, but how does one application grow rapidly and the other one doesn't get any usage? And that would not have been possible 10, 15 years ago because everybody was running on their own hardware, and that would have been very painful. Should also mention that they also asked about things like what did people feel about their fixed broadband or mobile broadband, and relatively positive answers, or is 60% positive or 75% your call. But people were relatively satisfied with their fixed broadband and felt that mobile broadband was at least as good as it was before the crisis. Now, I wish they had asked exactly the same questions, maybe both questions on both groups. They didn't. This may have to do with previous questions people have asked in the same questionnaire before. But so this is by no means like a full understanding of the space, and it was still a relatively small sample, but it's an interesting sample, and people in general felt that ICT technologies have helped. But there's obviously lots of questions like, did they help enough? Like, suddenly our needs are much bigger for ICT. So should they have helped even more? That's maybe a question. And there's also, I should mention that there's some potential long-term impacts based on like what people started doing, like new user groups like the elderly used new applications, and so that's probably going to affect the future, not just this year's behavior. And then lots of people care about resiliency. So yeah, I think that's it for me.
Yeah, so I thought that one of the sort of key things in this, we just saw so much shift to a ton of internet usage from an application point of view, and you saw that in a bunch of the papers that were presented, sort of talked about those types of points. One thing I'll say from the area that I was working in was around as one WebEx, but all of the web conferencing systems. So the three major ones are probably three largest are Microsoft, Zoom, and WebEx, and they all saw incredible growth in their usage. In fact, similar incredible growth on that. We don't have the data out. We can't share the data yet, but the Synergy, as a research firm, has data from all those companies. We'll show how they all compare and how they all grew. But when that data comes out, you can see from that data they all had sort of similar growth. The overall issues there, as we rolled that out, was I sort of watching over the last couple of days where we discussed it, sort of seemed like, oh well, we had in fact, I'm going to stop sharing the slide here. We had a 15 or 20% increase in network traffic. It's sort of what we saw several presentations over the last couple of days, or on Monday, and that's certainly true. But I definitely, from the point of view of the video conferencing vendors, that was a real problem. All kinds of places we had incredible numbers of systems that didn't have enough bandwidth, areas where we're having really network performance issues. So the major video providers on the internet, YouTube and the rest, they reduced their bandwidth in most locations by 25%. That made an incredible difference to everyone who was trying to do video conferencing or remote learning through these video conferencing applications. So I think there was a lot that made that happen, but I think it's well worth discussing a little bit and just reflecting on what it would take to make that to happen, and it had a huge impact to the quality, to being able to deliver usable video conferencing systems. Now, over time, of course, people extended the capacity of their networks, scaled their networks. We're now back to a situation where those systems have gone back up to the full bit rates they were before. But I think that's one of the sort of areas that I'd like to talk a little bit, hope we can talk a little bit more about when we get to the discussion part of this. So I think with that, maybe I see Jana is here now, so maybe we should jump into your slides. Do you want to present your slides yourself, or I can put them up if you want, but probably works better for you to move them forward.
Oh, thanks, Cullen. I'm happy to do either, whichever one is more convenient.
You present them all.
Okay, let me do that then. Just give me 1 second. And apologies for being late. It's a bit of an insane hour out here. As you know. I don't quite know if I can do this full screen. So I'm just going to go to yeah, hang on. It's taking forever. I don't know if you're seeing all of my Chrome windows, aren't you?
Luckily, we're only seeing the one that's in front right now. Or we are seeing all of them. There's one we can actually really view. So,
well, we'll just run with this, I suppose. If I can't, I'm not going to try and do better than this. At any rate, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this data. I'm going to try and go through this in about 10 to 15 minutes. So at a high level, we monitored and view, obviously. So let me start off by saying who I am. I'm Jana Iyengar. I'm a distinguished engineer at Fastly, which is an edge compute / CDN company. So I work on networking and transport performance, and I'm part of the IETF and IRTF, and et cetera, et cetera. But more importantly about Fastly itself, we serve a lot of traffic to customers. We serve a lot of traffic for customers to users around the world. So obviously, we were sort of at the forefront of a lot of the effects of what we saw happen with COVID in terms of internet traffic. And so I'm going to talk about that in these slides today. Feel free to stop me as I'm going through this and ask questions. I may not be able to spend a lot of time answering them, but I'll be very happy to answer them quickly if I'm able to do that then. So at a high level, through this data is basically around the early period of COVID times. We don't have a ton of, I don't have anything to show right now, even though I've been tracking it since then. I don't have a lot to show since then. But just to start off with, this is a high level difference in traffic trends between a week in, so basically comparing 2 weeks earlier in the year, January to February, versus February to March. And the idea here to show you the difference between organic traffic growth versus what we saw happen during the early part of COVID. And these are different verticals, as they call them, streaming, digital publishing, social media, gaming, etc. And you can see that there's a significant increase, especially in digital publishing and in EdTech or education technology. One can infer what the sort of natural reasons why these happen. Obviously, people were going to news sites and various things a lot more, and also using, as people were, children were driven home, students were driven home, they were using online means of learning, such as Khan Academy and others, a lot more.
Do you mind going full screen on the slides, please?
I don't mind. It didn't seem to work. There. Is this working?
Better, thank you.
Okay,
Right.
thank you. So that's a high-level analysis of just total amount of traffic that we saw increase. And now I'm going to dig a little bit into sort of the dynamic changes in traffic as we saw them happen through time. We investigated a number of things. I'm going to limit this to just a few things that we saw there. So we wanted to look at the sheer change in traffic volume across regions. We wanted to see how that matched up with different events that were happening. As you remember, in March, basically different countries and within the US, different states were basically doing things at different times. They would announce different things. They would announce as COVID cases increased or changed in that particular region. They would have shut down schools, for example, and send people home, lockdowns, various other events that happened. We were trying to see if we could see reflections of those in our traffic. And so, like I said, at first we wanted to see the reflections in traffic volume. And more importantly, we wanted to find out if the internet was holding up. I don't know if you remember, but around that time, again, a lot of articles around, is the internet going to keep up with all of these people going home and doing everything from home? So even a lot of our customers and investors and others were quite interested in this question. So we wanted to look and see what happened to internet quality, so to speak. And for the geeks in the room, which is all of you, this is basically, what I decided to do was to use TCP delivery rate from TCP info that we record at our servers as a reflection of download speed. So even though the absolute number may mean something slightly different, the change in the number means a lot more. And we expect it to track effectively what the TCP connections see as download speed to users. So what you see here as download speed in the following graphs is basically TCP delivery rate. The mean TCP, I think it's the mean or the median. It is said in different graphs, but it's some measure based on TCP delivery rate to users from our servers. So at a high level, again, we saw traffic volume change dramatically, pretty much went up everywhere uniformly. And some countries like Italy, this is between a week in Feb and a week in March, so 1 month period. The change was just dramatic. This was the period when also Italy went into complete lockdown. So again, for a good reason, the traffic went up. We could explain the increase here. But the download speed didn't uniformly go down everywhere. It did go down in some places, but it actually went up in some places. Like in Japan, for example, it went up by 10%, which is because my only answer is it's Japan. But yeah, I mean, the infrastructure definitely did hold up in many places. So I'll walk through these in just a little bit more detail. I don't have a lot of time to walk through all of them. So I'll show you just a couple of graphs and move on to the next topic. So here's an example, which is with the UK. Just a few things here before I start off. The x-axis here is time. And that's going from February 27th to March 30th, about a month-long period. The blue curve, if I'm sorry if you're not able to see the colors very clearly here, the blue curve is the one that's rising up. It's the one that has a positive, roughly positive slope, not the exponential one. But the roughly positive slope is basically the change in traffic volume. The corresponding, roughly corresponding mirrored green curve is speed. Red curve here for context is, what's it, Matt?
Change in traffic volume is year over year or month over month, or?
The change in traffic volume is based on percent change from February 27th. So February 27th is our reference point. It's an arbitrary time, but yeah. The red curve is simply the COVID cases, and that's on the right axis. So you can see sort of what happens to traffic volume and download speed as things happen. Now, the one thing I'll note is that we'll talk about the summaries at the end, but at a high level, we can see various things happening. You can see these vertical lines here. The first one says travel restrictions, and that caused, when travel restrictions were announced in the UK, that caused a bump in traffic volume and a corresponding decrease in delivery rates, as we saw. Similarly, schools closing and the country lockdown caused even more dramatic change in slope in terms of the increase in traffic volume. And we saw, again, a corresponding decrease in delivery rates. As you can see here, there's sort of a rough mirror here. The UK definitely seemed to suffer a fair bit from the increase in traffic volume in terms of the infrastructure being able to support the increase there. A couple of things I'll note. Here you can see the weekly patterns. The bumps are weekends and the flatter areas are the weekdays. That sort of disappears when the travel restrictions happens. So I'll come back to that in a moment. That's the UK. This is Italy. I won't go to the details here. Again, we can walk down and sort of see minor bumps and some significant ones. But the biggest ones we see are with school closures, announcement and school closures. We see a bigger bump happen there dramatically in time. Again, quality of the internet did go down, but again, not to the same extent as the increase in traffic volume. So that tells us something. I've got France here similarly. And again, even though things happen later in time in France, with school closures and schools closing, you can see a dramatic increase in traffic volume. It does make sense because, you know, with schools closing, not just do the children move home, but parents move home too. So pretty much everybody's moved home and everybody's doing work from home. And we believe that the decrease in download speeds or delivery rates is a reflection of how the residential ISPs were able to deal with and cope with this increase in traffic at homes as against ISPs that were serving enterprises. Of course, in France, you don't see as much of a decrease in delivery rate, and that's a high level. Now, there are two more things here I just want to note. The Netflix and YouTube both announced that they would, in Europe at least, they announced that they would reduce the default streaming quality to a lower value. That in our numbers didn't seem to make much of a difference. I mean, what we would expected that to do is to have increased the delivery rate of our traffic, which is not YouTube or Netflix, but it didn't really seem to. That's true across various countries as we see them in Europe. That's probably just for what it's worth. Again, I note that because I think that one of the things I take away from that is that ABR is working well. That's all I take away from that. I don't know that Netflix and YouTube had to do anything special there. I think it just seemed to adapt and work well. I won't go into the remainder of the countries here. Japan is a bit of an anomaly. It does see a similar sort of a loss of not diurnal, but weekly patterns in traffic. Traffic volumes do increase to weekend levels, and just weekend levels remain sustained we lose completely that signature of weekend, weekday things. But I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I couldn't find anything there. But yeah, delivery rate actually went up, which is fantastic to see. I think the residential ISPs that really stepped up. That's all I've got. Within the US, it was regional, so we had to do state-by-state analysis, and you see similar things happen in the US as well. So high-level takeaway from this set of graphs is that traffic increases were triggered by public policy announcements. We were thinking that maybe one of the things we were hoping to see, or not hoping to see, but expecting to see, was that as COVID rates increased, we would see people automatically shift this. But it wasn't. So COVID cases didn't really reflect in traffic. What reflected in traffic were the public policy announcements, which kind of makes sense again, because public policy announcements are discrete events in time. And so those are the ones that we were able to see very distinctly. Quality degradation, however, was more gradual. As people shifted homeward, people increased their activity at home and tried to figure out, get their feet on the ground and so on. We saw quality degradation happen. I'll talk a little bit more about that next. And the line between weekdays and weekends disappeared. This probably reflects what our experience has been since March. One of my friends, Nick Harper, created a website called march2020.date. Please go take a look at it. It tells you what the current date is in March. I think today is March 256, 2020. That's how people feel. And that's basically what, there's just been this continuity in time that things have, there's no, our normal patterns of usage, our normal usage, our normal experience of time has changed quite a bit. Yeah, the internet seemed to keep doing well, mostly thanks to elasticity. And I can talk about that more later as well. I'm going to go back to this quality degradation question very briefly, because we wanted to ask the question of, there is some degradation. We do see it. We've been able to still serve traffic. Things are still doing well, but clearly there is some degradation. The question was, is this degradation equal? How is this degradation distributed? So we had to sort of limit this to US alone. I did not do this for other regions. But at a high level, the way I approached this was to look at the US and divide it up into 5 different income regions based on income per zip code. So this is 5-digit zip. And I was able to get the data from IRS data in BigQuery and other data that allowed me to basically figure out what the incomes were. I created these income zones, which were informed by a few things. But basically, splitting up the US into these 5 zones, so to speak, allowed us to then look at delivery rate local to those zones or these zip codes. So just to be clear again, we divided 5-digit zip codes in the US were categorized into one of 5 different income levels, lowest to highest. And that should not be median income. That should be, I think, medium. That's a typo there. And then we looked at the delivery rate, the same TCP delivery rate or download speed to those zip codes, to those aggregates. And here's a high-level picture of median download speed within a zone or an income level across time. The same x-axis is time, and y-axis here shows you 5 different curves. Each one of them is the evolution of the median download speed or delivery rate across time. The one thing that really struck us, I mean, I did some filtering here to be clear, some filtering here to avoid large players like traffic going to other CDNs or traffic going to Google Cloud or things like that, to avoid those, remove those anomalies and filter this out to only residential ISPs and so on, mostly. The one thing that completely was huge for us to see so starkly was that delivery rates actually line up with income levels exactly. And that's just, to me, was stunning, because these income levels were not created based on our ability to differentiate delivery rates. We based them on completely different things. And then we pulled this data out, and these 5 lines, almost practically non-intersecting 5 lines, and you can see the bottom 2 lines, curves, start to intersect towards the end. And I'll talk about that in the next slide in a moment. But the fact that these 5 or at least 4 regions sort of are very clearly stratified tells us something quite important. The fact that high income level zip codes do get, for reasons of capacity and for reasons of capability, higher delivery rates and download speeds. That tells us something here. So, however, what we were looking to see was if the degradation was distributed unevenly, and we don't see that. We actually see the bottom download speed go up for the bottom regions, and that is actually interesting. So we dug in a bit more, and we found this. So this is Comcast, and I want to call out these companies here because operators get a bad rap all the time, and they actually did something really good here. Comcast announced at some point that they would increase the speed of the lowest tier of internet access called Internet Essential, specifically for low-income families and so on. They would increase the speed, and they made it freely available for at least 3 months. And we saw, corresponding to that, we saw an increase in download speed in those regions, which is just great to see in the data here. So the bottom 2 curves actually rise up there in the second week of March, and they're exactly aligned with the announcements that they made. And similarly, Cox Communications also did something quite similar. And you can see that there they basically completely eliminated the gap between these income regions. So I will end on this note that we managed to stay afloat. Like, the internet has for a number of reasons, and Patrick McManus, a colleague of mine, has written a really good blog post about what are the key reasons why we think we survived the volume increase and the barrage of traffic that we saw through these times. But we've done well, and I think that we were expecting to see not so many signatures, but we saw a lot of signatures in the traffic for various events. But in terms of degradation, in terms of quality of internet access, it is clear that that's work to be done, that we can make more equitable distribution possible. And it's also clear that ISPs have a fair amount of power and ability to close this divide. The fact that they were able to increase the quality meant that they had the fiber at a base level available in those regions, right? The capacity was available in those regions. They were simply not opened up. And the fact that they were able to do this and change qualitatively the experience for a lot of people says a lot about the power that ISPs have to do this. So I will leave with a link to these 2 blog posts, which describe these graphs in more detail. And that's all. I think I've gone over time. I'm sorry if I did.
No, that's good. So let's just start with questions about Jan's presentation or anything we want to talk about. So
I did the Q+ thing in the WebEx chat. I don't know if we're doing that today, but we can. That's what. So John, I have a question about the last point you made there about ISPs being able to kind of improve the kind of equity. Do we know if that kind of cost them anything, or have they continued that, or do they kind of call a halt to it at some stage? Is there an ongoing kind of possibility around it, or is it just a kind of a pandemic response once off?
Right. So I looked to see if for both Comcast and Cox, I looked to see what happened to this. Like, they were supposed to have offered this free for 3 months. So I looked to see, like, I had a thing on my calendar to go back and check and see if after 3 months the whole thing tanks, and it did not, which tells me that maybe the increase in delivery rates, or the increase in I can't remember what they increased it from and to the cap of bandwidth that they were offering. I think that stayed in place is my guess, and I'm guessing that increase in bandwidth, rather more than the free offering, made a difference. So I've seen that be in place after that. Like, I checked 2 months after they said they would close, and they still remained in place. Whether there was a cost to them, I reached out to Comcast. I didn't get a response, so I can't really speak for them. If there is an ISP on the call here who can speak to this, I would also appreciate hearing an answer to that.
Oliver?
Yeah, really cool stuff. I was wondering, so regarding the uptake for the lowest income bracket, so could this also be an artifact of people moving from a mobile network towards residential home networks? So did you basically distinguish between the network type as well?
I did not. In this case, I did not. Although I did do some digging, not in these graphs, they're not distinguished. I did look around a little bit to see mobile networks it was weird. I mean, I'll be honest, because, it's like suddenly traffic over mobile networks in Manhattan, the quality increased, probably because there are very few people using it. So we saw some interesting signatures there, but nothing significant enough here to show. I think pretty much this data is probably going to be dominated by residential networks. To your question of whether there were more mobile at home, there may be. I have to admit that I didn't really dig deep into that.
Yeah, so I think it would be really interesting to see basically splitting this up, just looking at the residential home part and seeing whether we see an increase there as well, or where it remains more or less stable there.
Yeah, I think one of the really nice things, one of the things I would have loved to have had is AS numbers with network type.
Yeah.
Instead of going around guessing and digging in, because it doesn't, the problem of classifying ASs does not scale. I would love an automated way of doing that.
Yeah, thanks.
I think another thing to remember is that the ISPs don't want to roll trucks to upgrade a customer service. And so the service tiers are all different in software.
Yeah.
You put the same equipment everywhere and you put knobs in it. And
I think that's part of the question there, right? Like was whether they needed to. Sorry, Matt, I thought you were done.
It's to some extent the service tiers are artificial. They're not intrinsic to the infrastructure. They're programmed.
Yeah, I think the data in the last two graphs that I showed actually demonstrates exactly that. But they had to turn a knob somewhere, and things got better, right? Which is why I think that there's capacity sitting there. Whether there's a cost to using that capacity, that's not clear to me.
Andrew?
Yeah, just picking up on that point first. Obviously, it depends what type of network you're talking about. That's absolutely true for a cable network, or for an FTTP network. Might be a little more challenging on an XDSL network, because a lot of the ISPs on those networks don't necessarily have different speed tiers. So they don't have the same capability necessarily. And I appreciate it does vary in different markets, but certainly in some markets, they won't have the ability to just turn up the tap. It would require a truck roll of some description. But clearly where it is software defined, I completely agree with the point that then it's discretionary on the ISP. And Jason will confirm offline whether there's any costs involved in that. Just a sort of second point, which I think covered something which is either you or Yari sort of mentioned. I think you both mentioned, in fact, about Netflix and others maybe degrading their sort of resolution for a while. Some of the ISPs I talked to at the time were slightly puzzled about that, because it wasn't really giving them a challenge so much on their networks. And again, I'm sure there are exceptions to that. The one thing which did cause some challenges, though, certainly for the European ISPs, was some of the big game downloads, where there were sort of new versions of games coming out. A lot of those tended to land on Tuesdays in particular, I think, in Europe, which, for those of you that are not in Europe, at that time of year, that conflicted with some of the big sporting events, Champions League, for those of you in Europe. So on some networks, they were experiencing peak load anyway. So then getting game downloads on the same evening was causing them some congestion challenges. And I think there was some discussion with the gaming industry to try and have a better coordination between ISPs and the gaming industry to avoid stressing networks unnecessarily just by picking different times or different days to put out their latest versions of Call of Duty or whatever. So I mentioned that, as I don't think that's come up before.
Yeah, Call of Duty is a bit of a killer, isn't it?
Jared?
Oh, I thought there was somebody else in between.
Did I miss someone? It may have been my mess up. Andrew? No, I think it's you.
Oh, okay, excellent. So two things. So one, wearing my Akamai hat. You know, we carried a lot of the streaming events as well as the game downloads. So we definitely worked with our customers. You know, so one of the tricks of being a CDN is that your customers come to you and say, "Hey, we're releasing this game at this time for download," and everybody around the world, either if they pre-purchased it or something, the consoles just start downloading the traffic. The consoles basically have foreground and background download methods. So it really depends on how the game publisher, releases, releases it and the timing of that. And that's something which, as a CDN, you actually don't have a lot of control over, because they release it whenever they release it, and that makes it incredibly challenging. What happened earlier, there'd been a trend that started in 2019. Like the tail end of 2019, with game downloads being kind of increasing in speed and frequency, about every 2 to 3 weeks, somewhere between 3 to 4 weeks, there would be a new, either Call of Duty or whatever update that would show up. And we definitely were one of the CDNs that was serving a lot of that traffic. And so we worked together with both the game publishing people as well as with ISPs to identify, kind of a better time globally to do many of the download events, and started to nudge these folks to release things or to post them more off hours, such that the load would shift basically to nighttime hours when most people were sleeping, at least for those. So that's that's a big thing. It's there's always new gaming event downloads. I'm expecting there to be many during the holiday season, especially as people get new consoles and the PlayStation 5 comes out as well. So that's gonna be really interesting. And then the second thing is, because of the failure of broadband in my area, so I'll switch hats. I built a little fiber to the home network to kind of service myself and other folks around here, because people at Comcast didn't build into the area despite having infrastructure close. And AT&T, AT&T offers an amazing 1.5 meg DSL to my home, from their service system. So given that, it's been really interesting for me to observe as people get access to high, good quality internet connectivity, where I'm now delivering high speeds to them, to watch that traffic, pick up for many of these events, and it's been something enjoyable for me to see as part of that. But the gaming download thing has just been, it kind of was one of the additional straws on the camel's back this year, in combination with everything else. So I believe Fastly also served a lot of gaming stuff as well.
Yeah, we did. Thanks for that. Colin, do you mind if I jump in here, or?
Go ahead. Yeah.
We definitely have to do a lot of dancing around those things. So somebody asked the question of, why are gaming downloads different? Gaming downloads are different in only that they exercise one particular muscle of a CDN, extensively. So it's basically large file downloads. It's like a DOS attack. Everybody arrives at the same time and downloads this giant file. So CDN's traffic is not like that normally. It's all file downloads and it's all web pages. It's usually short connections because web pages are smaller pages and so on. And this is not like streaming either because the client isn't adapting. Congestion control is shining here to the extent that it is able to, and there's a lot of failures there. So we do see a lot of basically that sort of play out. So it's a very particular muscle that gets exercised here, and you have to prepare for it differently. It's not the normal mix of traffic that we usually see. And typically what happens is with these really large file downloads, the things that suffer are the small connections and the web page loads. And so we had to sort of do dances around that to make it work well.
Yeah, and just to comment a little further on that, the client behavior is really interesting of how different consoles and different systems will fetch it as one large file versus fetch it in chunks. And so you get this varying behavior. So like an Xbox behaves differently than a Switch than something else, and so those varying client behaviors make it look a lot more, sometimes a lot more BitTorrent-esque, or the file sharing systems versus just one linear TCP stream. And then obviously other people have researched and talked about the impacts of buffer bloat and the ability to do better queuing, like the FairQB Codel or Toddle stuff. So that really makes a big difference. That can make a big difference on the client side experience as well, if that's being implemented in CPEs. But yeah, and like I said, and then the consoles behave differently for a background download versus one where it's user initiated, and usually the user initiated ones it tries a lot harder to download faster. So there's a lot of different subtle behavior differences here.
So I want to jump in on the comment about the people, the networks seeing no problems. So a lot of we were seeing a lot of problems in a lot of networks before YouTube and Netflix dropped stuff. And by problems, we mean we're measuring at a time when the user experience of the video and audio was impaired in some significant significant way, like multiple seconds, more than a second per minute, where there's like significant loss or quality artifacts. And all the major video conferencing providers substantially reduced their bandwidth to try and fight against that. And it just wasn't enough. It was getting to the point where people were talking about turning off video altogether, which would have really impact on remote learning. Now, when we went and talked to the network operators, they're like, was often on many cases was, no, we're not having any problems. Our network, they're looking pretty good. And we're like, it's looking pretty bad to us. And they're like, well, look at our throughput rates. They're looking fine to us. And we're like, well, look at what happens to any real-time media. Like, let's set up a VoIP call. And it's like, oh, yeah, that does look pretty bad. So I think there was some questions of measurement there. And I got to say that every network operator we contacted or talked to was amazingly awesome about working with us, trying to fix the problem, doing everything. Like, everyone just ignored the money, ignored the politics, just was like, yeah, we need to make this work for users. What can we do to make things better? So it was amazing from that point of view. And I think a lot of that came from relationships out of NANOG or IETF or other things where you could directly figure out a technical person to call inside of a company, and they took the effort to get you to the right person who could solve your problem. So that was amazing. But I think we do need to, it made me think that, we need better ways to understand for the network operators to measure their impact on different applications, not just on the download throughput. And I think a lot of people did try and figure out what they needed to do to keep the remote learning and the web conferencing applications up. So some of the traffic did split separately that way. So let's talk about that a little bit in this second session here of, what can we do to improve those types of things?
If I could jump in there, Cullen, thank you for that comment. I think that's actually, I didn't mean to suggest that our viewport is limited. And I totally appreciate your point there. We don't have any metrics on real-time traffic, and we certainly didn't have client-side metrics in here. So we couldn't really tell what was happening on the client. But yeah, that point is actually, it's a very good point. For the longest time, at least with operators, I think the measurements are limited and being known this, even for YouTube. Oftentimes throughput is used as a measurement of how well YouTube, for example, is doing, and that's not good enough. And I've seen this time and again with operators looking at what I think of as micro metrics or micro benchmarks, but they are micro metrics. Throughput is a micro metric. Your hope is that you're using that to reflect something you're hoping that reflects quality of experience at the user, but in a lot of cases it doesn't.
And look, I mean, it'd be a great thing if we came out of this going like the hard things are, classic web page usage, our games download, our, video conferencing, like we came up with a list of things and figured out different types of metrics for them. So anyway, I want to stop. I want to hand over to Anand here.
Hey, yeah, thanks. So quick question for Jenna, and I think Jared touched a bit on this. So I was looking at the same data from the CDN side, the GCP info data. But instead of delivery data, I was looking at RTT and retransmits. And there was the difference that was previously mentioned, like the wireless providers seem to have kept up well than the wired. But one interesting thing that at least I saw in some of the data that I looked at was I saw more fluctuations in RTT than retransmits. And I wonder if you guys saw that too, and what does that kind of mean in terms of deep buffers and the games we play with congestion control from the CDN side, and how could that impact going forward when we see these things, and what can we do to like tune down some of those parameters if we know that there are more deep buffers out there than we think there are? Jana, did you have any comments on that?
I did look at RTT, and I'd love to look at your data. At a high level, though, to your point of what can we do, I don't know that we can really. Congestion control is evolving ultimately, and we know that we want to reduce these variations in round trip time. But at times of deep congestion, we are going to see those sorts of variations. Where there are buffers, we will see them, and there are deep buffers. So I think your question was, what do we do about the cases where there are potentially deep buffers, right?
Right, and in such cases, for example, like just using BVR V1, probably not the best approach, right? Things like that. And I think it might be hard to like share the data, but having like a community kind of like guidelines and a little bit thought process around, just like how video providers would easily be able to jump in and reduce their bit rates. Arguably, that may or may not have like much because ABR was working pretty well. What can CDNs do to either slow down things that they can control, like file downloads, and the request for game downloads is not something that we can control. But what can we do to sort of alleviate some of those things in terms of congestion control for especially last mile latency links, and some of the things that was presented yesterday kind of like indicated that even though the link from the CDN to the ISPs were doing fine, or we were able to jump in and add some capacity real quick, the last mile is last mile, and if there's congestion there and we're still competing with all of the CDNs and cloud providers, so what can we do as a community together to like keep that fair, right, in some ways?
Look, we got a bit over here, so let's take a quick 5-minute break, and we come back. We've got let's see, Andra and Yari on the queue, and then we can continue on with it and move the discussion over towards making it better after that. Does that sound good, people? See you in 5.
Hey, Matt. I just want to shout out through this thing.
Oh, hello. What, are we 50 miles apart here?
Actually, no. More like 200 miles right now.
I think we're technically at 5 minutes, but I mean, I don't know whether no one really believes my 5 minutes. We should just start. Or
I think you should force people to turn their videos on. This is what my kids' teachers do anyways. You can't, unfortunately.
Jonna, it's much brighter there than it was 30 minutes ago.
Well, you know, the sun has a way of doing things. Yeah, I feel similarly in my head, by the way. Much brighter than 30 minutes ago.
Indeed.
I'm looking forward to start at 6 a.m. every morning tomorrow, next week.
So, Andra, are you back? And I think you're next up in the queue with your question.
Yeah, I'm back. Can you guys hear me?
We can. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so thanks so much for the awesome analysis. I think that was amazing. And I just had a few questions for specifically for the analysis you showed for the UK, because we looked at, you know, one of our operators in the O2 in the UK, and I was just wondering if we could contrast a little bit what you showed there in terms of the decrease in the throughput measurements that you had, and the increase of the traffic, and whether you actually broke down the analysis for mobile users and residential users. So this was the question that we got yesterday, whether we can observe this waterbed effect with the decrease in the downlink volumes of traffic that we have seen in O2 with the increase in the residential use. And also, you know, I think it was very nice to see the breakdown on the US analysis. But I was also wondering if the same analysis would be interesting for the UK on the breakdown of revenues for different people, different regions, because we actually did look at, you know, the census-based information that we got. I mean, this was the census in like 2011, because the next one is supposed to happen next year. But we did see quite interesting dynamics there. So a lot of the people actually moved from London. They went to different, you know, to areas where like marked, you know, suburban, or areas that were marked, you know, rural, or actually low income. Where it's actually a group where it's called challenged. I don't really remember the actual name right now. But yeah, I think it would be very interesting to contrast this and to look at, you know, the analysis from the point of view of the actual operator with the analysis from your point of view. So I'm just wondering if that's of interest, if you could comment on that, and you know, if you can.
Would you like me to answer?
Yeah, please. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm asking Colin if I don't know what.
Oh yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
give us a quick answer.
Yes. So at a high level, yeah, I was actually very keen on looking into other parts of the world. Unfortunately, data for sort of dividing up the country into these zones wasn't readily available. Like I said, for the US, I used IRS data that's available in BigQuery, and that was a lot easier for me to, even though it's actually super interesting. If you ever get a chance to look at the data, they've anonymized it in a very interesting way. But I couldn't find similar data, even in terms of breakdown to smaller enough levels. but if I was interested certainly at the time. I've not spent a lot of time on this since the summer, but I think that'll be very interesting in general. I think there is, like I said, there is a story here, right? There's a separate story here that came out of it for me, at least, is that there is a correlation between quality of internet, the bandwidth at a high level. I wouldn't say quality generally, but certainly bandwidth, and economic zones, so to speak,
Right,
or income
so-
regions.
I'm sorry, go on. If I
No,
could
that's all.
just
The
add-
income levels, yeah, please.
If I could just add something, because we actually did look within the UK, these output areas, this is public information, and they actually tag these at the postcode level, and the postcodes, in the UK are like a few homes, a few streets, very, very granular information. And we actually did check whether there was any bias within the way that also deployed their network, and we couldn't find any differences, any any sort of metric to show this type of bias, which is very, very good news from our point of view. However, there is still a bit of digging to do in terms of these differences between the different areas and the way that the people basically changed their mobility patterns and how that impacted and whether hotspots actually created in the mobile network. And based on our data, actually, we couldn't identify any new hotspots appearing after the lockdown, immediately after the lockdown. But I think it was a very interesting point that was made before, whether we could actually contrast this with user experience. And this is something that we've been looking at, and we were trying to actually understand whether we can compare the metrics that we collect from the network side with the actual user experience and create basically a similarity metric that is able to tell us how our users are actually experiencing the service.
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested in looking at this more if there was more data. I honestly, I didn't dig in, and that's all I've got there. But I think there's definitely interesting stuff to look into here, especially for operators. I would say that at a high level, the things that one should be careful to look at is you want to look at some notion of per capita. I think that's the important part here. It's not just whether the pipes are being used to the same extent or if they are being used more or not. But I don't know how it is in the UK, but presumably there's some sort of tiered service. So that also matters when people are able to sign up for tiered services, whether particular tiers are being exhausted more or not is something that's important to be able to see. From our point of view, we're able to see this entirely on the connection level. But yeah, I think there's definitely interesting things to look here, both in terms of network type, in terms of usage, and in terms of income levels.
Yari?
Yeah, I wanted to get back to your question, Colin, or observation of what was key about this network's feeling that things are fine, and then conferencing application people are feeling that, no, this is not working very well. And that's very interesting, of course. I think we have some sort of fundamental issues with our attempt to measure things, actually, because you typically can measure only usage, but not demand. Of course, in some cases, you can see that, well, you could send more packets clearly into this inconsistent network. But for instance, like people who aren't connected obviously aren't going to show up as users of packets, or their RTT can't be measured and so on. So that's an issue, but maybe that's a flip comment in some sense. But I actually wanted to ask a more practical question for you, Colin, that when you work with these conferencing applications, how much do you know and how much do you get to see of the sort of the big picture of problems could appear in many places, and my connection here, is it my Wi-Fi, is it my ISP access network connection? Is it further up in the IXP? Is the connection to the cloud farm congested or limited by contract, or is there too few instances, or is the thing just too far away? And I keep coming with different answers every time, and I have like a daily problem with a certain conferencing application, not yours.
There's people have cars, so yeah, every one of them has. Yeah.
I get different answers. Like I had actually like one thing that I was able to identify was that like the driver on my Mac OS, a MacBook Air computer had gone into some weird mode where it was introducing several seconds of latency for no good reason, while the other computers were not doing that. And so how do you need some more tools to figure this out, or do you think you have full picture?
No, we don't have the tools we need at all. It's a great question. I think this is a great lead into the sort of next session of what we would making it better. One thing I will, and look, I'm speaking from point of view of WebEx, but I'm pretty confident that I have friends that working at the other major conferencing vendors to understand they have very similar problems. First of all, it's very difficult for us to tell whether something went wrong on the Wi-Fi network or after that. Okay, and being able to get almost the most simple metrics from the access point you were dealing with would totally change our ability to guess where the problem was, whether it was Wi-Fi or on the network beyond that. For the network beyond that, you asked about sort of what level we're tracking. Probably a lot of people on this call have used Thousand Eyes or a product like that that is taking tons of metric points. You know, it's sending tons of probes from a zillion different points. We're doing it from, you know, from all the WebEx endpoints. We probe multiple. If you look at the WebEx traffic or any of the major vendors, they probe multiple ones of their data centers and track what type of stats they have. And then, of course, we correlate those and try and backflow through the network to understand, oh, look, everybody behind this particular router or BGP control point or something like that, we can see that they're having problems. And we will often be able to see where network data is being flopped on two different routes, or all the different types of traffic routing things that you might see. So we can correlate that. We can bring it back to, for this particular service provider, we're seeing everybody in this sort of network block is having a similar problem. We can often guess how a DSL or a cable provider has arranged their network by seeing the similar performance behind a given network element that's having problems of some sort, right? So we correlate that all up, but then there's not much we can do about it. Often we can't even figure out who we would contact at those companies to figure it out. And that's one of the things that changed during COVID was our ability to go like, we're seeing a problem in your network. If I'd done that, if I'd seen that, we're having a real problem in this space here, and it's causing issues for customers. A year ago, if I'd had that problem, they would have been like, yeah, log a ticket. And now it's like, okay, let me look into that for you. It was like a real shift there. So anything that we could do to get a little bit more visibility into particularly whether the problem was Wi-Fi or after the Wi-Fi would help, because no one has any clue. The applications don't have any clue on that. Maybe the OS vendors do. And then be able to actually talk a little bit more realistically about the network measurements. I mean, we were thinking about the things we do make it difficult for the service providers to actually understand whether our applications are working well or not. I mean, multiple of the video conferencing providers right now claim they can do fairly high resolution video conferencing with 50% packet loss. I mean, that should freak us all out. I don't think it's exactly true, luckily, but the fact that they're claiming this is really disturbing. And everybody is super aggressive about the amount of forward error correction things to do. For example, right now, WebEx spends more bandwidth on audio than it does on video. Okay, that's how much error correction is being slammed into the audio. And we're not alone in that space, right? So I think that anything we could do to sort of figure out where problems were and be able to give information about how to make that information actionable in some ways, to try and figure out how you might get that to the person who would care about it, would be really valuable. I think if I haven't lost track of the queue, I would say Jan is on it again next.
Yeah, Karan, I just want a clarification of what you just said. Did I hear you right? Maybe I didn't. Did you say that you're spending more bandwidth on audio than on video?
Yep, that's what I said. I know, sort of. That should be
digesting that.
So if I can, because that, I mean, That surprised me for a second when I heard it, and then it unsurprised me just because like the tolerance of audio failure is way less than the tolerance of video failure for good QoE, right? Like, so if you're pixelated, who cares? But you know, if you said launch the missiles, then that's a problem. So this actually lines up with some QoE, you know, issues I've had on various conferencing platforms, not yours. With respect to like actually keeping the latency in sync, right? Like, so I've seen the big thing that I ran into on one unnamed provider as soon as like COVID went bad was I got up to like half a second of desync from the video and the audio. And I'm guessing that was, so thank you for explaining what caused that to happen. I mean, it's just the FEC buffer is just huge, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, and everyone's got to that. And look, I'm not arguing that's a good plan that we're doing that either. I disagree with it in many ways. But when people are like, well, when you have a set of engineers that are, let's say, engineers are not deeply involved in network control who are given the problem, make this work with 50% packet loss. Guess what they would do? Yeah, that's what they did.
Well, and therefore ended up with 70% packet loss. But
exactly, yes.
And now the challenge was, how do you make it work at 70% packet loss? And there we go, chasing our tail again. But I'm surprised, just very quickly, not to. I'm not surprised that the audio stream is more important. Obviously, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. That's what you want to do. What I'm surprised still is that the bandwidth. I would have imagined that the audio stream bandwidth was substantially lower than the video stream. So I don't know how much FEC they're packing, or the video quality is across the board. Are people just like turning off their video, and therefore the video bandwidth is effectively lower? I'm trying to just square those things away in my head.
Right. So there's no one else on the queue, so I'll just answer a little bit. The type of audio quality we're having right now, just the raw audio quality is about 30 kilobits per second for Opus. That's about what the codec would take at that level. This level of video that you're seeing right now is probably around, for each one of these thumbnails, around maybe, I don't know, you could probably do that 120, 300 kilobits, something like that. A lot of these services will use somewhere between 500 and 2-3 megabits per second overall. And the rumor of like turn off your video, it improves things, usually isn't really all that true, because most of the services, they're transcoding in the cloud. And if one person on this call's video network is really crappy, we'll just slow down the video to that person, not everyone. So it's video on or off makes less difference than you might think.
Yeah, I've been watching if you're running on a machine, you go to health checker and see like the WebEx stats, and you can see it's ranging anywhere from 600 kilobits to 900 kilobits. It's pretty good. Although I'm bursting up to sending 1.5 megabit of video right now. So.
But to your point, like the amount of when people have a 30 kilobit per second audio stream and they are fecking it up to close to 1 megabit, that's a fair amount of feck.
So that's in queue. Did you?
This gets really questions of like, look, we're going to run out of time here soon. What are some of the big issues that came up overall, not just these video conferencing programs? I'm happy to talk about my problems all day. What are some things that we could do to improve stuff? I mean, let's jump on the queue and give us your 10, let's hear from some people we haven't heard from here.
I wanted to make an observation that I first noticed decades ago, and that is there's a human control system, which is there's always some heavy, high intensity, high resource consumptive service that's also sensitive to usage, and people do or don't use it according to whether or not how well the internet performs, and that makes space for all the smaller services. And turning off 4K video, for instance, just makes perfect sense. And one 4K video session is a significant number of other users. And you need to remember that companies like Google and Netflix, we also have our own users doing other things, and we don't want to interfere with their own traffic. So it makes perfect sense. The other cases, Google has turned down YouTube, for instance, when there has been earthquakes severing multiple transoceanic cables, and just turn it off because it makes space. The other thing I wanted to observe is there's a wonderful story. I don't want to tell it in full, but I'll give you the punchline now. Several decades ago, there was 1 month somebody saw a lot of traffic in the unknown port category in an IDS system. It was port 80. And the doubling time for that traffic was 6 months. And the internet kept it up for 10 years. And port 80 went from a minority of the traffic to a majority of the traffic. And there was a time that the internet traffic growth was doubling every 7 months. That's only slightly faster than happened in March. Excuse me, only slightly slower than happened in March. And there were a lot of lessons learned, and there are engineers at all the large ISPs who've been through those years and have experienced other forms of success disasters where you expect 1,000 customers and you get 1 million customers, or other things like that. The pouring concrete and pulling conduit are slow and can't be hurried much, but turning up equipment can be done much more quickly. And there's a bunch of strategies and such. I'm not an ISP, but there are people on this call who understand these things. I made the statement earlier that I think the internet worked as intended.
So, Christy, you brought up the topic of security impacts on the network. You want to talk about those a bit?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to talk, because we've talked a lot about like observations and stuff, and obviously in the UK MCSCs, we have a security specific viewpoint. And so, yeah, I suppose more than just kind of shifting to home working generally, where obviously there are new types of attacks you can get, new footholds, a lot of IT departments rolling out new equipment quite rapidly, a lot of them using VPN access and stuff for the first time, some vulnerabilities in those VPNs and stuff. There's obviously quite a big shift just in terms of home working. But we also saw, because of the COVID specific aspect, that because there was a global pandemic on, the users that we would see using a network would be different in terms of their security posture, in terms of their kind of awareness, and even quite sophisticated users were generally a bit more vulnerable in a pandemic situation. So a bit more isolated, or a bit more eager for news. So just kind of a difference really in terms of how vulnerable users were to manipulative techniques like scams, fraud, and that kind of stuff. So I suppose for us, the network impacts, you know, generally there was a real, we talk about the capacity builds and the speeds and the volumes and the internet's ability to cope with that. I think that's all excellent, like I really do. And that's just testament to the years and years of work that's gone into this. And like you said, those industry relationships spinning up and being quite agile in how we worked. From the security side of things, I think we just saw a huge spike in fraud and scams related to COVID, and a whole new set of attacker behavior to combat, including new targets like vaccine laboratories and stuff to protect, and as well as this like big shift to home working and VPN spin up and stuff like this. So I suppose the network impact, like for COVID from our point of view, was just really this huge new security effort that was needed. And the security industry is always quite agile. We're always sharing and kind of thinking about the greater good, and you know, sharing any attack techniques that we find and ways that people can defend through indicators of compromise as a common technique. One thing that the NCSC did specifically was to launch our suspicious email reporting service. So a lot of people were getting an initial phish through email, and it would be something like, you know, tax rebate for COVID or whatever, or, you know, all the sort of government schemes that were going on. And then recognizing the way that users were more vulnerable generally, and some may be more likely to click than in a normal non-pandemic time. This service, the idea is that people can report it, so more advanced users can report it, and then those sites can be taken down where they are malicious, so that it's protecting kind of the herd. It's like this herd immunity kind of thing. And so, yeah, so that's one initiative that we started, but that's obviously quite a low level manual intervention. And so I suppose just as an open question, like, would that work as well if there was another kind of pandemic or another kind of situation like we're experiencing now, as people shift to home working? Were there lessons that we could have taken from the security impact? I know that a lot of people kind of rolled out their enterprise infrastructure quickly, and yeah, it was just a whole new set of things coming out that maybe we could just look at a bit from a security point of view. It's kind of what I wanted to start a discussion on. I don't know if anyone else experienced similar things.
So look, I'm just gonna, Stephen, can you just jump the queue and ask your question to Christy here, and then I'll get back onto the proper order of the queue.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Christy, I was just wondering, do we have evidence of an increase in fraud attempts, or whether what happened was displacement of people trying to attempt fraud via other cover mechanisms towards attempting to use COVID as a cover for their fraud?
So your question is, like, does the total number of attacks increase, or was it just roughly the same level of attacks but more people using COVID as a cover?
Speaking about fraud.
Okay, for fraud. Yeah, so we saw, I mean, we can speak to like government experience there, because we obviously protect like government domains and government brands. So where there are things like tax, people saying, oh, it's the tax office, you're due a rebate. We can speak to that. So we saw a spike for government domains being used, particularly for fraud, using COVID as a cover. Part of that, I think, is that we already have taken down quite a lot of existing fraud sites that make use of kind of government brands. Comes under copyright actually, which is quite amusing. But yeah, so no, I don't know if the total number of fraud attempts increased, but just I do know there was a pivot that we were discovering new indicators of compromise that all related to COVID. So one statistic that we put out in our annual review was that we supplied 51,000 indicators of compromise to the NHS that were in our COVID response. So yeah, a lot of them are kind of the domains of things, like all coronavirus or COVID-19 related. Because of like attack targets, that did pivot. So we saw attacks on areas that we've never seen attacks on before, like vaccine research institutes, increased pressure on NHS and other those kind of health centric sectors.
Robert, are you still on the queue?
I am. I was going to ask or raise a different topic about gaming, but just to go back to Kirsty's point, one question I have is whether there's any way or any help of trying to solve some of the security things at the DNS level. So, for example, like OpenDNS, now Cisco Umbrella, where it's able to, through seeing a lot of the DNS queries, spot potentially new domains that are coming on that might be compromised, and hence you only need a few people to be marking these as potentially compromised and protecting a lot more people. So the same idea of where you're saying about people flagging up these emails that are compromised and contain attacks and things, effectively to be able to do some sort of network level thing where you get that same sort of protection through various people saying and sharing their knowledge that this is dubious. And the same idea, I guess, with Gmail, I believe, where they have a lot of ability to filter emails because they see a lot of the spam being sent to lots of people, and hence they have extra knowledge about the spam emails being sent to lots of people, and hence can filter it out, sort of almost like the network layer, the application layer, rather than each individual person saying, wait a minute, I want to filter this is spam email.
I mean, shall I answer that?
Sure. You got a quick comment on replying to that? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, we just disclosed that we have the protective DNS service in the NCSC, which is a DNS level filtering system that covers all government domains. So where we do have indicators of compromise, like I don't know, like fraudulentcovid.com or whatever, we can just deploy that, and it protects the fleet of enterprise devices for government. So we found DNS filtering like that to be a very, very powerful tool. It's not like perfect and it's not delicate, it's quite coarse, but it does really work for us. We've got loads of stats on the topic, which I'll happily share after this.
Matt? Oh, sorry, maybe I misunderstood somebody's plus one back there. Okay, Alicia, I think it's you next.
Okay, I think my comment is somewhat different, but let me try it anyway. So regarding security, actually my observation is mostly about the application level security. As everyone knows, at the very beginning of the COVID, when we moved to online teaching, there was a huge surge about the Zoom bombing. You know, this whatever people attacked the Zoom. But that was during our spring quarter teaching. So when we started the fall quarter back in August, October, just when I was writing the submission of a white paper to this workshop. On that same day, the original deadline, we got another pledge from the campus warning us that there is a huge Zoom bombing again coming in. So at this time, I think I didn't hear from others as a serious problem. It was a problem at UCLA. And this is kind of anecdotes plus speculation. UCLA is, you know, bigger campus. We teach kind of different things from foreign languages to the performing arts. I'm pretty sure there's some faculties that are not really know the use or safe use of networking that well. So that for those people, they might not have good precautions or best practices handling their issues, the online life. But previously, whatever they do is only affected themselves. But now everyone actually performing their job online, and their lack of understanding of security brought up the big issues. So I in my submission, we raised the question, who is ultimately responsible for application security? Are we expecting every single human being that everyone will be online to get security training, to pick the strong password? Is that where we're expecting 10 years down the road to secure applications? Or this actually is a fundamental problem here that requires technical solutions? That is my first comment. There's a second comment, I just want to mention it. Zoom is not a stranger to us. You know, I've been using Zoom for online master program for 6 years or 5 years, some long time. And nobody cared about attacking it until it became the first line of tools for home networking, maybe for home working. I wonder whether the other tools just lying there and their security vulnerabilities are not known until when they become first line applications. And that is my big worry, as I see Zoom as an example. I'm done.
So I think that's a great, I'm going to put myself on the queue here, and I think this is a great segue in time to move into the sort of, what things that we could do better. So, I mean, some of this is users changing, no question about it, learning new tools and new things, adapting to things. But I think some of it too, like to answer your question about passwords there. I mean, from a technical point of view, one of the things that we could do is figure out how to make it possible to not have passwords. And look, I understand there's a lot of work going on in passwordless right now. But I mean, I think that's the type of things I'd like to talk about for the next 15, 20 minutes or so is what are ideas that come out of the papers that were submitted to this conference or things that people have seen that are things that the technical community, the internet, the IETF might work on to make things better. So let me just open it up with that. Let's see, I've lost track of, there's my cue. Okay, Jana.
Thank you, Colin. So this is something that I've been thinking about for a little while, but it's become more even more pressing in these days. I'll be quick. At a high level, one of the big things that we're missing, and I think you touched on this earlier, is about observability. We all have our own little lenses through which to see the internet, but we don't have a good understanding of what the overall thing from a user's perspective is. We all have, again, only those who run client applications have that, but they don't know what's happening in the network, for instance. This has always been true. This has always been true because when people run experiments, for example, if an operator runs an experiment, they look at their own little benchmarks to figure out whether the experiment is changing things or not. All the while, the metrics they're using may not or may have inverse correlations with quality of service from the quality of experience of the user. We've seen this in the past. This particularly has been true with middle boxes that terminate TCP connections. That's just one example. That oftentimes are bought and sold because they seemingly improve usage of network at an operator. At the same time, I'm familiar with some experiments that actually demonstrated that video streaming quality of experience increased by over 10% when they bypassed some of these boxes that an operator had deployed. So there's a huge sort of a mismatch, right? Operators and endpoints, clients, servers. There are at least 3, maybe more parties that have different viewports into this world. They have different incentives. Of course, I don't know how we can align all the incentives together, but at a minimum, if we can get observability, I don't know how to solve this problem. It's not a small problem. I don't think it's a small problem anyways. But if there's a way for us to understand how end-to-end things are affected, in these days in particular, especially through COVID, it would have been super useful. But that's something we're missing. We're missing, except for when people like us, some of us get together and sort of share our data with each other. That's the only way we know. It'd be a lot nicer to be able to do this more broadly and programmatically.
Nisha?
I'd like to follow up your comment to say we should move away from depending on user-selected security as like a first line of, fighting against the attacks. But exactly how? I think we do have a big problem. That is, I don't see a clear framework on how this is internet security actually is a coherent system. I think currently we have piecemeals. There is this, secure the channel. But then secure the channel lead to this unscalability because we cannot allow everyone to connect to the servers. So that's how Fastly comes into business, providing middle boxes. If we go down continuously along the current path, this architecture, as was designed 40 years back, point-to-point connection, it's inevitable we go down further direction of more and more middle boxes. This is the architecture we want to see 40 years down the road. And Janet, I saw you actually have a talk on the YouTube about the end-to-end internet is gone. I was gonna actually have a chat with you when I get the chance out of the busy teaching. Is the end-to-end internet gone? And why? I think it's a big architecture question, and the IAB should take it on.
Brian.
Let me stop typing for a minute. So I would endorse John's point. It's a super difficult problem, and one that I hope to actually come back to work on at some point. Is how can you balance like the end-to-end observability, where end and end are basically sort of semantic things on either side of the network that the network is going to affect, with privacy and security, right? Because like the easiest way to do this would be like everybody gets, you open everything up, right? Like, so TCP was nice and observable, but you can't build a network that's not going to be interfered with on top of TCP, as we found from the middle box question. The other thing I wanted to go back to, I think it was Andrew's question at the very beginning of today, because I had a thought about this as I was looking at some of the data and looking at the data from yesterday, is we should be very careful about how we measure the efficiency of the network. Because I think, there's sort of rules of thumb in provisioning the backbone that says, well, you're going to have 30% year-on-year growth, you need to have 30% slack. And that was the slack that kept us from dying in those days when everyone was asking, oh my God, are we going to be able to handle this? If you look at some of the work in data center networking, if you look at some of the work like in software-defined internetworking, one of the hopes that work rests on is that better control will allow us to get rid of these overheads in the network, because we'll just be able to run things hotter. Taking experience from data center networks, which run significantly hotter than the public internet does, and we can't actually say how much of a safety margin we need in order to be able to pull off something like another COVID. But observability would get us the numbers where we know like what the difference is between safe efficiency and unsafe efficiency. Now, I don't see like, even as the co-chair of the Path-Aware Networking Research Group, I don't actually see sort of these technologies being deployed in the internet at some point where the efficiency would significantly threaten sort of the resiliency of the network, but it's something to keep in mind.
Jason.
Sure, thanks. So a few comments and maybe some areas to mark for improvement. One, I think, as maybe it was Stephen joking at the start, if this had happened a decade ago, we might have been fairly screwed. But, this was a remarkable success. The fact that, this huge shift occurred and the internet basically worked and supported all this video traffic is pretty awesome. So I think that's a big success that wasn't mirrored in other areas of the economy, like couldn't get paper towels for 3 months or something like this. So it's a big difference. In terms of improvement, though, I want to echo some comments others made about measurement and observability. On some level, I think we get what we measure. It's sort of like if you give a salesperson a commission for selling something, they're going to sell more of it, right? So if you measure something, you're going to get people to focus on it and work to improve it. So I think having some new measurements here, beginning to shift focus away from purely sort of capacity measures is really important. So I think that's one area that we can improve, and perhaps building in, as others said here, observability inherently in some of the protocols or even the end-to-end applications. Certainly QoE measures are something that, say, a WebEx operation would see for their clients. Netflix would see it for their clients, but how much of that QoE data might be exposed for others to be able to measure and analyze is unclear. I think very little or none. I think it also points out, maybe going to Jenna's slides, that there's a bit of a gap here in terms of policymakers and regulators' understanding of how the network actually works. Not clear that they really understood the rise of adaptive bitrate sorts of things, and the fact that maybe their actions would literally have no effect. They were thinking of a network in a different era. But I also wonder, and I think this is maybe understudied, I think maybe more sort of economic analysis has to occur to see, why wasn't there additional capacity freed up in those markets? Is there a structural difference in the way that capacity investments are made or incented? So some of that, is probably something for maybe economists to study. And then the last comment is, I do think that there are probably, Colin, to your point about forward error correction, some what might seem very nuanced points of feedback that need to occur, but very important ones. So I feel like we're missing a feedback loop. If you thought of like we're all one global DevOps team, right? We still have this split between some architects someplace and people operating. And it seems like there's this feedback loop that's missing back to some of the app developers that are maybe overusing things. And it reminds me a little bit of a few years ago when, maybe chipset vendors were building in huge buffers. And we were like, no, why are you doing that? Like, stop giving me 3-second or 5-second buffers. Like, that's counterproductive. So I feel like we have to find those feedback loops that are missing and help close that loop as we have everybody from across the ecosystem here. Thanks.
That's a great comment. Hope those all made it to the notes. Robert, you want to bring us back to gaming a bit, and then I think after that we'll go over to what next.
Well, maybe these are what next comments. So on the gaming, so one question I had for Jana was whether the pressures he was having were ones at the network layer or on the servers for when they're handling these large downloads of new games and things. And then from a sort of practical point of view, although we could potentially re-engineer the internet to handle some of these things better, a more pragmatic approach could be to actually, for the IETF, to produce some informational guidance about the impact these large downloads are having, and to give some potential advice to the games writers and things and the people who are providing the sort of infrastructure, to give them some advice on potentially how to write these things in a way that is less impactful on the network and other users of the network. So it's not such a great, lovely technical solution, but it might be quite a pragmatic solution to maybe improve the network's usage for all users.
Makes sense. So look, I want to switch to a different thing here. I want to tee up Stephen for a second to talk about what do we want to do on Friday. We didn't really get too much to the topic today of, wow, it's amazing the internet didn't die. This went great. We should probably talk a little bit more about that, but I think there's probably some other things we should talk about on Friday. Stephen, what do you want to say about this? Let's start there.
I think Maria was in the queue, so I don't know if you go first and then finish off by talking about Friday.
Sorry, Maria, I missed you. Go ahead.
No problem. If you want to take the last 10 minutes, then I can also wait on
just we got time. Go make your comment. It was my stupidity. I just missed it.
Yeah, I was somewhere in the middle, and by now I think most of my comments were made by other people. But I wanted to say, mainly from yesterday, I had two main observations. One thing is that everybody looks at their isolated metric, and we really need to share the data and look at everything together. And then also that we actually had problems to measure the user experience, rather than we measure what we can measure, but it's not sure we measure the right thing. So in that sense, I think we actually need to do some work to not only focus on the aggregated data, but also look at the cases where people have detected problems and make sure we get the right measurement data at the right corner. And that probably only works if we can somehow integrate more measurement capabilities into our traffic, so we can retrieve the data when we need the data, and then also have some kind of more automated way to share the data. Like, you don't have to put all the data to everybody, but you have to collect the data at the endpoints or whatever, and then make them available when you need them, and make it in an automated way, because coming together in a call like this and just talk about it doesn't work all the time and is very slow. So that's where we could do some protocol work, I think. And one minor point where I don't have a solution to it all is also somebody made the comment that we just measure how the network is used, but we don't have a way to measure how people would like to use the network. So, what's missing? Like, what's the additional capacity? What's the additional thing people need? And that's more a social question than a technical question, maybe, but it's also an important point.
Those were excellent points. So actually, before we jump to Friday's schedule, anyone want to jump in with a last comment? Going, gone. Okay, so I'm handing it over to you for Friday's schedule.
We have Lisha now.
Oh, nope, sorry, I'm just looking. Lisha, please.
I'm so sorry being an outlier. Take you 2 more minutes. So I think it seems that there's a big focus about, hey, can we push? If we can do that, it seems that that's our only job. Is that the case for this workshop? Just that we can deliver packets.
No. I mean, I'm interested in the experience we can deliver, not the packets.
So I think like some of the comments I made about like sharing the actual experience at the user and measurement data from the user, whatever, it does apply also to higher layer protocols and potentially even to security problems we have. So we maybe can think about it in a broader scope.
So basically, that's my observation of the day. Yeah, how packets get delivered and how capacity can keep up. But I think there's much deeper problems we're facing as for security. Talk to people who handle DDoS today. How much margin they have holding things up. I think it's a much bigger problem. And the COVID made the system more kind of vulnerable because we have more dependency, I would say, not to say made the system more vulnerable. We have much bigger dependency on the internet now. My son is a doctor, and lately the ransom attacks went to hospitals. I would use that as an excuse to say that's COVID related, but that's really a more general observation. Whichever places, applications become critical, that's where the attack go. When and where we're going to address that much bigger question.
So maybe I do agree. I think there is a much bigger question we need to tackle. I'm not sure if we can, or like, I think this was a problem that was there before. It just got even more obvious in the current situation. But like, there have been attacks on hospitals and these kind of things before. We knew before that this is a critical infrastructure. There's more work to do, but I don't think, or like, for me, the learnings from like this crisis weren't too big. Because I knew before there's a problem. So for me, that's a separate problem to tackle, I think.
But this just give you yet another evidence of the severity of the problem.
I agree to that, yes.
Yeah, so
I think you have one really key point there, which look, all of these security problems that we've seen in COVID, every one of them pretty much we've seen before that, the scams, the fraud, everything, variants of them, right? Your point was that I think the most important point is that the internet has become more critical than ever before during this time, right? That there was an actual shift for a lot of the population. I mean, that it is hard to do.
So I even agree to that point because like people notice it, right? Like they have been using it every day, right? But like if we would have had an internet breakdown like a year ago, that would have been like equally bad for our economy and everything, right? So it has been critical before.
I agree with all of it. The question is whether, I don't mean to say this helps solve the problem, but shouldn't we use this COVID incidents as a wake-up call and start thinking about the big question, not to say solve this at this workshop?
Fair. I think we should all be solving the big problems. But let me just because we've only got 5 minutes left here, let me jump back over to what are we going to do Friday? So handing it over to you, Stephen.
Okay, so first of all, I assume we do want to talk Friday because we're kind of running out of time here. But let me just pause for a second to see, does anybody want to say we should not meet Friday? I'm hearing nothing. Okay, so let's have a session Friday. It may or may not last 2 hours. I'll give it some thought and have a look through the notes, see if there are topics that are kind of obvious. The observability one and seems like it might be at least. If anybody has other topics, then just if you want to send me a mail, I'll send it to the program committee list. If you have like 5 minutes worth of slides, we could do a couple of those. And I'll send out a mail or with some suggested agenda tomorrow at some stage. And if anybody has agenda topics that haven't come up yet that they want to suggest right now, go right ahead. We have a minute or two left. Or if they have a better plan.
One agenda topic that I would be curious in getting this group's feedback on, if there's time for it, and this is just not just my as an individual contributor here, is whether today across many service providers, so we see whiting out of diff-serv quas markets, and whether there might be an incentive to not white them all out or allow some to go through, or just discuss quas a little bit. I mean, that's a topic that if we have time for, I would like to talk about a little bit. And I'm perfectly happy to put together a single slide that helps explain it.
Cool. So any others? Not right now, or? No, sorry, Jared, yeah. We have Jared and then Janet.
Sorry, I was typing, I typed -Q. Colin, can you share that slide with me? Because I'd kind of like to put a counterpoint slide for why service providers have to clear out those marks at their administrative boundaries.
Awesome. I'm making a phone call with you later. We'll do slides jointly.
Sounds great.
Great. Jana?
Diff-serv cage fight. Put Colin and Jared in the room. I was going to ask if Stephen, I'm assuming maybe you're already planning this, so I'll very quickly ask, are you planning to have some sort of action items coming out of this workshop? I missed Monday, but I intend to be there on Friday.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we wanted to identify possible topics to work on, any conclusions we can reach. The recording for Monday is available. It's on YouTube, so you can watch it back. There was a bunch of other measurement kind of topics. Yeah, if we can reach conclusions, that would be a good thing. I think somebody earlier suggested we should all vote that the internet was great, and we'll probably agree on that. But other more interesting conclusions would be good too.
Yeah, I'm thinking more about like concrete things that we could actually do. I mean, we're identifying areas that we could work on. I wonder if we could turn those into actually concrete things. But that's a suggestion.
It's actually volunteering to look over the notes for such things and propose them.
Yeah, fair.
Great. Excellent. So if you look over the notes in the pad and see, I mean, I guess the one that strikes me from today was this observability as a thing to design in, maybe. To think about that some, how to do it in a privacy-friendly way, in an efficient way, and so on, a useful way. So yes, I think if we can identify action items, that will be good.
I'm just asking maybe put some time on the agenda for Friday.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I don't see anybody else in the queue, and we're at a minute 2. If anybody wants to just grab the mic, now's your last chance. Cool. Otherwise, I guess I'll send mail tomorrow at some stage, and we'll all chat again on Friday. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. See you Friday.
Thanks, everyone, for the great session.
Thank you. See you Friday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So